Okay, welcome to Wrexham University. Croeso cynnes i Prifysgol Wrexham. Diolch i chi, y staff, myfyrwyr ac aelodau'r cyhoedd am ymuno efo ni heno. Fy enw i ydy Chris Bellis ac dwi'n uwch darlithydd mewn physiotherapy yma yn y Prifysgol. Mi fydd y darlith heno yn cael ei gynnal yn y Saesneg, ond mae yna groeso i chi ofyn cwestiynau yn y Gymraeg, a fydd Sara yn hapus i ateb yn y Gymraeg, a fydda i yma hefyd i helpu cyfieithu os fod angen. Fyddai nawr yn gofyn i'r athro Mandy Robbins, sef y cadeirydd heno, i cyflwyno ein siaradwyr. Diolch yn fawr. Welcome staff, students and members of the public to Wrexham University. My name is Chris Bellis. I'm a senior lecturer in physiotherapy here at the university. This lecture will be conducted in English. However, the Q&A session at the end of the lecture, questions are welcome in Welsh. Sara will be happy to respond to questions asked in Welsh, and I'll also be on hand to assist with translating any questions and responses if needed. I'll now hand over to Professor Mandy Robbins, who will chair tonight's lecture and introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I've been provided with some very useful notes, and the first one says, introduce myself. But Chris has already done that, so I'll move on. Thank you all very much for coming along this evening to listen to this lecture. And I'm going to take my glasses off so that I can read what I want to say. This is our first public lecture since we've achieved research degree awarding powers. I think we should have a clap for that. It has been quite a journey, to say the least. Our success is down to the hard work of Fran, who's here tonight with her team in the research office, and the leadership of Professor Richard Day. So a big thank you to our PGR students and their supervisors who all contributed towards that amazing outcome. It's a real milestone for Wrexham University, and we're really very much looking forward to the next chapter. Now to more mundane matters. We're not expecting a fire alarm. So, in the event of an alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exit, and members of the research office will escort everyone to the assembly point in the car park. Okay. So now I'm going to introduce our speakers for this evening. So, this is our first ever double act lecture, which is particularly fitting because research today rarely happens in isolation. The most meaningful insights often come from collaboration and interdisciplinary, and tonight's speakers embody exactly that approach. Sara Hilton is a senior lecturer, a UEFA A licensed coach, and a leading figure in football education and community development at the university. She teaches on the BSc Football Coaching and Performance Specialism degree and leads postgraduate and partnership provision in sport. Sara is also a fellow of the Higher Education Academy and a former assistant coach for the Wales Women's Under-19s national team, bringing extensive applied experience into her academic work. Her PhD explores how Wrexham AFC and its foundation influence identity, culture and community and well-being. Joining her is Dr. Chris White, a lecturer in the health and well-being. Chris completed his PhD in 2023 on active travel as a public health issue, and his research focuses on physical activity, public health and community partnerships. He works closely with local authorities, national bodies and Wrexham AFC, and serves as an institutional lead for the Welsh Institute of Physical Activity, Health and Sport, helping to connect research with real-world policy and practice. The rise of Wrexham AFC has been one of the most remarkable stories in sport in recent years. The club's success and global profile have brought clear opportunities and benefits for the town and the surrounding area. But as its reach continues to grow, so do too does its influence, touching a widening range of people who interact with the club in its many different ways. In tonight's talk, Sara and Chris will explore how Wrexham AFC is shaping identity, community and culture, both locally and globally. They'll offer insights into fan experiences, the role of the club's charitable foundation, and the broader social impact of sport under the media spotlight. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sara and Chris, and please join me in giving them a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you so much, firstly, everyone, for coming tonight. It's a really great turnout, and it's really nice to see so many friendly faces and so many new faces as well. Of course, it's all about me and Sara and nothing to do with the football whatsoever. But yeah, we really appreciate you all being here. And another thing that I'd like to add on to that really nice introduction is that, yeah, I've just always had this passion for sport. And when I first started my undergraduate studies, the fact that I could explore that further and in so much depth just really excited me and motivated me like education never had before. I could actually do something I was interested in. And I've kept that going through the themes of whatever it is I've been doing, and especially that focus on well-being, mental health, broader health issues, societal inequality, those kind of things that are so important to us as a department. And I also have the privilege, and it is a privilege, of being on the supervisory team for Sara's PhD as well. So once I've done a bit of our introduction, Sara's also going to talk about the brilliant connections that have been developed with the club, and also all this exciting stuff that you're embarking on with your PhD as well. Okay. Just a quick disclaimer before we start. Obviously, we are talking about an incredible journey, an incredible sporting journey, but an incredible community journey as well. And I'm sure it's why it's brought many of you here tonight. We are going to just say that we're not claiming, however, that sport in general is all good, or that football or sport is for everyone. We have to acknowledge that for large proportions of society, sport and football might not be quite simply their thing. It might not work for them. And even at our most elite level, we see lots of research to suggest that, you know, there are significant pressures, triggers at the elite side. We see some studies conducted in countries where they've looked at an elite athlete population and a general population, suggestions that mental illness might have greater prevalence among the elite athlete population. So it's not to say that sport is this all amazing thing. There are some problematic aspects with sport. It's not necessarily the answer to all of society's ills. And we have to acknowledge that having a successful football team, as we do, that certainly leads to things like a sudden active community. We can look at things like the 2012 Olympic Games, where we were told that it would inspire a generation into lifelong physical activity. In actual fact, our physical activity levels didn't really shift. There was a slight uplift shortly following, but long term we didn't really see that shift. And a lot of that is the fact that a legacy doesn't just arrive on the basis of an event. We have to make that legacy happen, and that's the really exciting stuff that's coming through the football club, through the foundation, through the work that Sara and her wider department are doing as well, and it's all amazing stuff. So what we are here to explore, both tonight, but in terms of our research journeys as well, is the important role of sport and sport foundations in our personal, local, maybe even national identity, as well as our general well-being, and how we might be able to use football as that vehicle to generate community well-being. We're really interested in the relationship between the club and things like how we might be able to develop that sense of self, express our sense of self. We're even developing projects around things like what projects connected to the club, like walking football, can do for both our physical well-being but also our mental well-being and our cognitive function. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on and developing quite rapidly from a research perspective around the club. It's such an interesting story, and it's so right for us to investigate from a research point of view. I think also what's quite exciting is Sara and I are both have young families. My little girl I brought along tonight, maybe to win a few over if the content doesn't quite land for you. But she will grow up having been born over the roads and will probably never have to explain to someone when she goes on her travels where Wrexham is and what Wrexham's about. I just think that's quite exciting and quite amazing, really. Her small talk for the next few years is probably sorted on an international level, Another element of the disclaimer, though, is we're not going to claim to be club historians, and I'm sure there are people here tonight with much more of an in-depth experience of that kind of ongoing progress with the club and the ups and downs of the club over the years. But I just wanted for anyone who wasn't familiar, just to give you a few highlights around that. So the club was formed in 1864 by a group of cricketers, so I'm told, who wanted to expand their club. The oldest club in Wales, and there are claims to be the third oldest professional club in the world. I'm sure many of you know the history around the racecourse ground as well. It's interesting to note that what I'm saying here is that football isn't a new thing to Wrexham, of course it's not. FA Wales was formed in Wrexham 150 years ago. Thanks for that, Jane. So yeah, massive history and significant successes through that history. More recently, 2008 to 2020, the years in non-league football. Attendances reported to be around as low as 1,800 for several fixtures. Now we're at a point where our national bodies, our local groups are funding and helping support the club to rapidly expand the capacity of the club. The demand is so much greater than what we have available. So that's a significant turnaround in itself. 19 to 20, the league got ceased due to the pandemic, and they came up with some different calculations on how they were going to conclude the league, but the club finished 19th, near relegation, the lowest position in the club's history. So we're talking about, at the time, a fan-owned club with really strong traditions, those attached to it working really hard to ensure that the club continued. And then enter Ryan and Rob, and that's where another significant chapter in the club develops. When I say Ryan and Rob, if anyone's not familiar, the Hollywood owners of the club as we now see it. What has spanned from that is what I've seen called as the best brand story of the decade. It could be argued that when the owners got involved with the club, part of the script, what they wanted to develop, had already kind of been decided. It was that kind of rags to riches story. That was what they wanted to develop, and that was what they potentially wanted to portray through what is now a global media form of the Welcome to Wrexham documentary. However, it wasn't just that. It really did appear from the get-go that the owners sought to learn about the club's history, learn about the community, learn about Welsh language, traditions, culture. That's not to say that they've got every element exactly right from the get-go, but I think everyone or many people have been won over, perhaps, by their apparent thirst to learn all these different aspects. And I think that's what separates this story from some others. It hasn't just been a case of someone rich turns up and chucks a lot of money in. We see that at loads of football clubs, but that's potentially been some of the unique aspects here as well. And in many cases, that's really paid off. Many of those things I talk about, this development of understanding Wrexham as an area, the history, as an area, the history as a club, understanding Welsh language, Welsh culture, really key features in that documentary that's been on Disney Plus and shared around the world. So some quite key Welsh symbols as well, not just as a Wrexham issue, but some quite key Welsh symbols receiving that global recognition and global viewership. What we are interested in is whether that approach, this kind of person-centred community approach, will that ever have its limits or its constraints? One of our key research questions actually is, what has the development and the increased exposure of the club meant for our traditional fans? Those who were there through the non-league years, those who have been there since the 60s, the 70s. What does that mean for their connections to the club, for their identity? The fact that essentially what has been so important to them and such a core of who they are as a person for so many years is now being shared with many more, not just within Wrexham, but globally. So there are some amazing things potentially to be gleaned from the globalisation of the club and the brand. But what might that mean for some of our core? That's something that I'm really interested in. In terms of some key figures, simply from the owners coming in, merchandise sales went up 600% in the first year of ownership. Some really significant sponsorship deals came through. And that, already we were talking about globally recognised brands. The documentary itself gained around 1 million views per episode to begin with. Now we're looking at about 5 million per episode worldwide. And it's not just the men's team, of course. The women's team are now moving towards a semi-pro model and going from strength to strength. So, a really fascinating story that's been really impactful for many people. I think when it first surfaced, though, one of the key questions that many people had was why Wrexham? We might think on an individual level. Caroline, I'm going to name drop you. You've said to me absolutely loads, nowhere's deserved it more than Wrexham. I remember you saying that to me a lot. And, I'm sure many of you would agree that that's true. But also people were thinking, well, why? Why us? And there was some natural scepticism around what was going on. There'd been a history of decisions made around the club by different people in ownership positions that maybe didn't always have the heritage of the club and the community at the forefront. So that scepticism was natural. And no one could really put their finger on, well, this is why we're coming to you and not 80 other clubs. We've seen suggestions from Rob McElhenney, one of the owners, that he saw how, he wanted to emulate his own upbringing, coming from what he would describe as a traditionally working class area, where sport was at the core of that community. He really wanted to emulate that somewhere else and see how that could be expanded. There's been suggestions from executive director that they set up a bunch of criterion really and saw which club would best fit. They decided they wanted to get into buying a football club. They decided they wanted to develop a documentary around that and see how they could not only develop the club but also help potentially to develop a community. And then they saw, which clubs would kind of best fit that. And I've seen mentions that Hartlepool, they were quite close to going for Hartlepool. The fan ownership element, I think, was bound to be attractive, and there's been some suggestions around that. And, the fact that they were also away from league rules at the time, so there was less rules around money and spends and that kind of stuff as what you see in league football, which, when they got promoted, came alongside those challenges as well. There was a lot of scepticism, natural, but of course there was a lot of excitement as well. What we do have to acknowledge is, as I've already said, this isn't just money and branding. Some really key people have been brought in from, with experiences of all through the football pyramid. It also takes more than 11 skilled players to win matches, as a club and as a community, it's been a phenomenal success. So I'm just going to hand over to Sara now, give myself a little bit of a break, just to talk through what you've kind of been able to develop so far.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Noswaith dda, pawb. Good evening. So yeah, it's been a really, really busy 18 months or so, really, and it's great to see some of my colleagues from the foundation here this evening. There were times, I think, over the past 18 months where I've seen them more than my colleagues in my own department. So yeah, great to see them here. So last year, we were really excited to launch a formal partnership with Wrexham AFC Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the football club. Within that, we've launched a collaborative programme, foundation degree in football and community development, whereby our students work for the foundation, they engage in placements with the foundation. I was looking at some of the figures today, and even though we haven't yet started that foundation degree, with our current BSc football programme, just short of 10% of our student body is engaged in the foundation in the work that they do. So it's a fantastic opportunity for our students. In part of that partnership, we then sort of signed on the dotted line that we would have exclusive rights to any research projects. Now, that doesn't mean to say that's just solely with us. We do involve, and you'll hear from Chris shortly, around projects with other institutions as well. But we do have that exclusive research opportunity, and it's fantastic. And some of the projects that we've got going on at the minute and to come have been fantastic and will continue to be fantastic. I think it's really important to note, typically, foundations of football clubs, in terms of how they report their data, tends to be around sort of that participation, health outcomes, etc., which we are doing that in support of the foundation. And I'll talk through a different way of approaching data collection through my PhD as well. So yeah, some really, really exciting projects going on. Some of which are, or most of which are here in Wrexham, but actually some of which are international as well, and with more to come, which I'm happy to share with you shortly. But yeah, back over to Chris. Thank you.
Okay, so what I just want to cover now is the kind of things that we're looking at from a research perspective. A couple of projects that are already underway, and then Sara, you're going to unpack. You know, you're a year into that PhD process, aren't you? So you're going to unpack where you've been so far with that process and where you see that heading. One area that we're really interested in is what, as I've suggested, what this growth of the club, the increased exposure from the club, both in the UK but also globally, might mean for people's sense, feelings, attitudes towards Welsh language and Welsh identity. Why is that important, and where might the club fit into the kind of academic arguments that we've seen around that so far? Well, to pick the first point, that there are many academics who suggest that to develop something like an identity of a nation or a community, we need to have that awareness of the other. You know, we only develop that sense of ourselves and who we are as a community or a nation once we have that awareness that there is another, and we can contextualise and put a border around who we are and who the other is. Obviously, sport falls into that almost perfectly. It's one of the ways that we can most immediately express potentially our local community, national identity. As a man, the majority of questions that I get asked when I meet another man for the first time is, who do you support? Yeah, it's just your go-to small talk question. Sport is inherently linked within our identity. And yeah, to follow on from that, Williams and Robbins have argued that Welsh people probably had little sense of themselves as a national group until this process of the othering occurred. And that can be linked to the Statute Wales Act 1535, which was effectively a ban on speaking Welsh. And from that, you create the possibility for Welsh speakers to actually conceive themselves as a group, those forcing and encouraging that ban and those resisting. And in the absence of other identity markers at that time, language becomes the centre stage in this conceptualisation of what Welshness is. Bringing back to 500 years on, Bradbury and Andrews have argued that we have to acknowledge that there has been relatively stagnation in the number of Welsh speakers. Post-evolution, there's been that expanding trend of Welshness and declining Britishness. So we're really interested in, as I say, what role the growth of the club might actually play in that. So we're viewing identity here as not something that we inherently own or are given, but identity is a performance. We can reflect on who we are as a person, but we also seek to demonstrate that to others. I can see a few Wrexham-based tops in the crowd tonight. We constantly not only reflect on our identity, but we perform our identity, sometimes subconsciously, and often through symbols. So what we have to recognise is that this symbol in particular, that was once a symbol of the few and the more local, is now a symbol of the many and on a global scale. So what Wrexham Football Club is about and what it means, that's ever expanding. We find that really interesting. I think what's really interesting in terms of the previous slide and that developed that sense of other, that sense of Welshness, Wrexham Football Club plays in the English Football League. And so in almost every match, there is that potential for not only local but national identification and expression. That we, one of the main things in North Wales around that. So you have the opportunity to perform, act as Wrexham, but also potentially North Welsh or Welsh. Now that might, and these are the questions that we really want to answer and address, that might translate into more positive sentiments towards the Welsh language. As people reflect on their associations with the club, it might bring about that greater sense of Welshness. It might then encourage them to, I am going to dip in back on my language a little bit more. I am going to explore the culture, the history a little bit more. But it might not be necessarily so. It might be that the practice of supporting Wrexham in the English League could actually serve to negate that need to engage in other displays of Welshness, such as learning or even expressing support for the Welsh language, because you've kind of already addressed that your main driver for that is, I'm attached to the club, and that becomes to the forefront. So we're not at the stage really where we can say either way, and we it's highly likely that for some people there'll be a balance there. But we find that really interesting to explore. Could have some interesting implications. A further tier is our interest in the extent to which that globalisation of the club does impact on fans, as I've said. What I want to go through a little bit quicker is that I've mentioned that we're also looking at things on quite a practical level. So currently there is a walking football programme that, Sara, you've been really driving and heavily involved with in relation to the foundation. We want to speak to those people coming along to this walking football activity, which has really grown, and explore this idea of the Wrexham effect. So to what extent are you here because of what's going on at the club? That's our core research question there. What we're also interested in is, what does that mean for you on a physical activity level? The one point I'm going to focus on here is across Wales, people over the age of 55 are less likely to engage in physical activity. But I think the important one for me is to have less confidence about taking part in physical activities. So we're really interested to see what this programme can do in that regard. And I think this just summarises our key academic and theoretical issues so far. And it's a nice point for me to hand over to Sara.
Thank you very much. Let me just preface this, I guess, by just saying thanks Chris, how fortunate I am in being in the position that I am to be able to do this PhD. I've got a fantastic supervisory team with Dr. Sara and Chris is my secretary supervisor. I'm incredibly fortunate to have the backing of the foundation as well, and also our civic mission team. So I am in a very privileged position to take on this responsibility of doing this PhD. So yeah, it's been a very exciting time. How do you sort of capture that in one study? I don't know, but I'll go through sort of the approach. But prior to that, I suppose it's just sort of trying to capture why I'm doing this PhD. So as Chris has said, foundations across football, they are a huge part of football clubs now. They are a necessary part of football clubs, and they engage in things around health, education, employability, identity. They run all sorts of programmes, and Elgan, I'm sure you can attest to how many programmes you're engaged in and how knackered you all are in the community from everything that you're doing. But they are socially embedded, and they can make a massive difference within our local communities. Just to sort of point out some things, so with the different programmes that they run around, they've got their primary dragons, fit dragons, just to name a few, which will target different groups within society. But something that I'm eager to look at as well is the accessibility of that. And are people accessing these programmes purely because of the badge? But equally, is that an unwelcoming thing for certain people as well? So if you've not been brought up in football, or as a Wrexham fan, does that put you off from engaging? So we're looking at how we can bridge the gap around that as well. I was incredibly fortunate. As you said, there's a global element to the club, so I was incredibly fortunate last year to go over to Lesotho, and we have subsequently, as a university, become partners with Kick for Life Football Club as well. From that, we're now developing pathways of education to the university for people from people in Lesotho, or for people in Lesotho, and also looking at current research projects around their new gymnasium that was funded by the Olympics Committee. So looking at the impact of that within their community as well. So there's so many exciting things of which our students will become part of those research projects as well. And hopefully we'll be heading back over very soon. So as I've said, there's a lot of strengths within football foundations. And again, I'll bring it back to this particular football foundation. So I'm going to, the approach I'm using, and I won't go into too much detail, so I'm going to take a Bordersian lens, is what it's called within academia and within research. And I'll talk through what that means shortly. But essentially, these are some of the things that I'm focusing on. So the cultural legitimacy. So the badge opens doors, as we've said. From a university, my colleagues in the room already know this story, but we've had at an open day, we've had someone come from Australia to attend an open day because their father, who was a businessman, really wanted to see the word Wrexham on a certificate because he understood the brand power of that. Crazy, but the badge can open doors, and we've seen many cases of that. And again, that links into the global attention surrounding the club and how they manage that locally, how we manage that as a university, as a key partner as well. Partnerships with schools. So again, I've mentioned some. So we've got the primary Dragons programmes, a lot of third sector organisations that they are linking in with. And then the most difficult part for the foundation, for most football clubs really, is being the intermediary between policy requirements, so whether things from Welsh Government, things from the FAW, and actual needs of the community as well, and how they manage that. Some of the tensions that can be caused are around sort of that precarity of funding, short-term funding. How can they make things sustainable? How can they make things meaningful long-term? So, in terms of the research gap, so as I mentioned before, so foundations, so a lot of the data that they have to pull up, I keep looking at them because I know they have to do this. A lot of the data they have to pull up are, how many people attended, how many people completed, what are the health measures, those sort of things. Well, actually, my research is looking for a relational understanding. So actually, let's go and speak to these people and these people who've attended and these participants, and let's actually understand how it's impacted them. So let's get that relational understanding as well. And from that, the questions sort of changed. So instead of getting that data, I'm actually looking at who is benefiting from these programmes, who is getting access, who's actually being excluded. So as I mentioned before, if football isn't an inviting environment for people, how can the foundation next door bridge the gap for those individuals instead of just potentially just appealing to the same demographic constantly? So again, in order to do that, and I won't go too academic on this, but I'm looking at using the work of Pierre Bourdieu for this, okay? So I'll talk through what some of these things from his framework mean and how it relates to next door. So when I say next door, we obviously know I mean the football club. So the foundation sits and tries to find a balance across many different fields in the community. So we've got the football field, so its association with what happens on the pitch and with the actual playing side. Then we've got the policy field, so again, Welsh Government initiatives or requirements, Football Association of Wales requirements, and then the community field as well, so that sense of culture, history. And the balancing act is pretty tough, as you can imagine. Each of these fields is competing for the same money, for the same attention, and to have the same impact. So the foundation are actually having to do a lot of things in a lot of these different fields. So trying to find the balance between that is really difficult. Then within those fields then, you've got different forms of capital. Okay, so we've got economic capital, so the funding and the grants, all the financial side of it. We've got the cultural capital, so staff qualifications, coaching badges, etc. Social capital, so networks, the relational element, and then symbolic capital. So just to sort of give you an example of how this works and apply it. So we've got symbolic capital, so the club badge and the brand. So that's symbolic capital. With that comes funding, sponsors, attention, media, which all then falls into economic capital. It increases the economic capital of the club. Then with that economic capital, they can then provide more training, qualifications, coaching badges for their staff, which then they can diversify their programmes, put more programmes on and projects in the community, with schools, third sector, which then may have an impact on the social capital as well. So part of what I'm looking at is if there is an impact on the social capital, what is the impact? But that's sort of the framework that's the framework that I'm working with. Methodologically, so how I'm going to do it is I am going to sit down and speak to the staff, have some very nice conversations, I'm sure, but with foundation staff, with the coaches and with the public, with people that we're going to Walking Football, who are part of their Fit Dragons programmes, and really seek to understand what these things have meant to them in a relational sense. So I don't want to look at numbers or data in that sense in terms of, that impact. I want to hear from them as human beings what their experience and the impact is for them. In terms of some of the topics, a lot of it's going to be around how I shape the questions as well. So in terms of the staff, it'll be, who accesses these programmes? Who makes decisions on what funding pots you go for? Who makes decisions on what are your, in terms of your strategy, who are the societal groups who are the priority? Historically, I know it's been children and young people are the priority. Right, well, who's decided that? Who's then being excluded? So then that should come up with some ideas around how we can maybe mitigate issues or tensions, or open up more opportunities to other people in society as well. A huge part of this as well is my role. So as I say, I work with the club very closely, both the football side, the professional side, and also the foundation. So my role in this, some people might say it could have some bias because I'm involved, but actually that's a real strength of the way I'm going to do this. So it's a massive part of being reflective and having a lot of reflexivity. My role is key, and understanding my role within this project is going to be key as well. Chris. Thank you.
Are you staying up? Or
I'll stay up. I'll stand here patiently.
So hopefully you can see how our research into the club and its increased exposure is emerging. And has quite a wide span to it as well. There's the identity elements. There's Sara focusing on the foundation in particular. We're looking at globalisation as well, we wonder if today's talk has encouraged you to reflect on your own local identity, perhaps your national identity. How do you express that? What's important to you in that regard? Has that been changed, shaped, developed in relation to what's happened with the club? I think they're all interesting questions. And of course, identity isn't in any way fixed. I remember when I was younger, conversations as laddies, who was the biggest... I'm from the West Midlands originally, all my family connections are here, but I'm from the West Midlands. So who was the biggest West Brom fan? What made you the biggest West Brom fan? Whose dad had been going on for longer? So we always, like to express our identity to the extent where sometimes we have contests over identity. I'm also wondering really whether some of you would be interested in taking part in some of our research. That's another call to action from us. So we have one project up and running at the moment around the walking football staff. Now, there is a group of people already involved there who we are recruiting from. But what we're also looking to do is have what we call a control group. So what we're doing with that group is, in one level, conducting interviews with them and asking them about what made them come along. What is it about walking football that really does it for them? What is it about the club that really does it for them? But we're also going to run some short cognitive tests, thinking activities, and trace how over a year, whether their engagement in the walking football has an impact on those activities. The suggestions that it absolutely will do, but that's what we're wanting to follow. So we're also looking to develop what we call a control group, a group who don't engage in that walking football programme, and see how their attempts at thinking activities develop over the year. There's a £10 Amazon gift voucher involved. So not necessarily to do with your experience of the club directly, but just if you wanted to be part of this process and engage into some research, there's that project up and running. And I appreciate that it's quite small, but that would be a case of emailing Ian Davis Abbott, who's project lead on that, or either of ourselves, just to say, we'd be up for that. We'll be up for hearing more. Other project that we have up and running is the identity, culture, language element. So there's a QR code attached to it, which I'll flash up again in a few moments. But it's basically a QR code or a link, if that doesn't work for you, that takes you to a survey. And that survey asks you to reflect on your attachment to the club, whether that's, I don't really have much interest, whether that's, look, the only thing I think about the club is it's annoying how busy it gets on a Saturday, through to I've been here for years. We just want to know and reflect on experiences about what this increased exposure, what this growth has meant for you. And this is the aim of this project, is to feed into those key questions that we've got there around expressions of Welshness, expressions of identity. And this survey has gone out both locally and globally. And I'm pleased to say that we've had some responses from America already. So there is the QR code. If anyone did have interest in engaging with the survey on that, or simply after a bit more information, it will take you to a link straight to that.
There's some phones out.
There's lots of phones out.
Got some willing participants
hopefully
already.
It's just a case of taking a picture on your phone if you can. There's also the link there, or as a complete backup, it's a case of emailing myself and Sara, and we can send you the link directly. I'd just like to finish up with, I haven't had my 5-minute flash yet. So. You're only 5 minutes. Grand. So I just want to finish up really with giving you a flavour of some early findings from this project. So I've had the pleasure of attending a couple of focus groups, which is basically a group interview, with people in the US who have been really won over by the growth of the football club, the success of the football club. The people who have participated in this so far would now call themselves super fans, and they all came via the Welcome to Wrexham documentary. their reasons to come in the first place were varied. You know, it wasn't all, we all like Ryan Reynolds or anything like that. There were some who wanted, aware they had Welsh ancestry, and this was the thing that prompted them to, okay, you know, maybe I'll explore that a little bit more. They saw that there were Welsh cultural elements within the documentary, and that really brought them in. There were others who quite simply did like the actors, and it wasn't just Ryan Reynolds. There were people who were there as big Rob McElhenney fans. There were others who were quite simply just into sports documentaries. They said, look, it's a really all popular genre in the US. We'll give this a watch. And they were seeing that it was quite unique to what they'd seen before, which was more focused on performance and getting into the lives of the professionals. Whereas I think what was unique about this documentary was really the stars of the show was the community. What went on the pitch was almost a side note in how they portrayed it. So really interesting. And of course, what we have to recognise is at the time, you know, Wrexham were by no means the best football club in either this country or the UK as a whole. And yet they're still not. We're still talking about a championship level football club with huge ambitions. But I just think it's interesting that we've got this global exposure and global interest in a club that's in the second tier. It's a very successful one at that. Some were also interested in the idea that these owners were fish out of the waters and wanted to potentially see how it went, potentially see how it failed. You know, there was kind of that appeal. Following the documentary, they really felt like they were in on this quite quickly. What has interested me is that so far, not one player has been mentioned. It's not, you know, I really get behind Wrexham because I really like how so-and-so plays, or not even Paul Mullin got mentioned. And the owners were really, you know, hardly mentioned. And once, you know, once these US fans were in, that might have been the thing that brought them there, but it was by no means the thing that kept them there. Suggestions that their sporting headspace was taken up by Wrexham AFC. We were even talking to people who were previously season ticket holders at NFL clubs and have gone all in on Wrexham. And as I say, they were just wowed by the people stories there, the connections with the community. They thought that was the unique aspect. But for them, what was most appealing was how you could have this club that was so closely positioned within the community. It felt as though it was part a love of what was going on here, but part a rejection of the things that they weren't keen on in US sport. What we see in US sport is your big shiny clubs, but not too much underneath them. So you either make that college level or the professional level, but there's not as much interest or anywhere near as much interest in the rest. And it fascinates them, this idea that you can shift through so many leagues, that there can be so many permutations throughout the season, and that it can be based, you know, within such a local level. Now a city, originally a town, that just fascinates them. They suggested that in US sport they felt like they're spectators. Again, I think there were some rejections around product consumerism and all that kind of stuff there. Even as far away as across the pond at Wrexham AFC, they felt a part of something. And that clearly had an impact on their views of Wales as well. Every single person who's come forward for these focus groups have said that they've been over, and they've said they've just had the most amazing experiences when they have been over. To many people in Wrexham, it's the racecourse ground. It's always been there. You know, to them, they've actually called it the pilgrimage. We've gone on the pilgrimage to Wrexham. We've been in the turf. We've gone to the ground. To be there to them just feels such a privilege. It was just fascinating to hear. I even wondered if there was a bit of, for anyone watching The Traitors, this got brought up a lot, didn't it? Confirmation bias. But yeah, it almost felt like there was a bit of confirmation bias in some regards. You know, they came expecting to see this great spectacle, and everyone just being so lovely and supportive of each other. And that's that's what they saw. They said, I was from my stay arriving in Manchester Airport to going round Wrexham, going to different elements of North Wales, coming back to Manchester Airport. I didn't hear a cross word between anyone. But fine, and we were saying, we need to put you in contact with the North Wales Tourist Board. They were selling such an amazing picture. But it's clearly had such an impact on their view as a nation and as an area. Phenomenal. And that's led to them having, real attempts to not only understand the club and know the starting 11 and follow transfer news and that kind of stuff, but really try to get into the history of the club, the culture of the club. And I was wondering, it did seem as though they wanted to maximise that relationship. They couldn't be here on a personal level every week. And that was their way of relating themselves to the club. Perhaps, again, performing their identity, proving, shaping with others that that's what their identity is. Developing that sense of internal, external fandom. We've put questions to them where, we've said, what would your answer be to someone who says, well, to be a proper fan, you've got to reside local to the club, you've got to attend the games. And they said, well, it's not for me to say. They did recognise that it would have to be someone else who would have to validate them as a fan. I found that interesting in itself. But that's how they saw it. We can't say whether we're proper fans or not, but we're really getting into learning about the history, the culture, the values of not only the club but the town. So, just some really interesting conversations. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this.
Can I just give another
Please
point?
do.
That was Jamie Edwards, head of the community at the football club, told me this stat about 12 months ago. About 12 months ago, so it may be different now. But Visit Wales actually did a study and asked every viewer that had watched the documentary, the Welcome to Wrexham documentary, if they intended on visiting Wales, and 1 in 3 said they fully intended on visiting our lovely country. So that you're talking millions and millions globally wanting to come to our little city. 1 in 3 globally. It's phenomenal, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy. But yeah.
I'm talking about the super fans there, and I'm talking about small. Mary's a big country. I'm talking about speaking to 6, 10, 12 people. To that level, but you can see these as you say, you can see these kind of things permeate through, and it's great. It's interesting. It's beneficial. I do just have that interest in what it means for our hardcore long-term fans at the same time, and I promise you we'll keep exploring that. Okay, I'll leave that QR code up, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.